sponsor can't speak to us.
Okay. Perfect. Sorry, if you don't mind, I'll just be behind
I'll
you.
just stand here.
Sure.
All right, welcome to MadJS. Thanks for coming. We're going to be hearing about WebPack from Chris. He's been kind enough to present this week, or this month. As always, I moved the website temporarily to github.io. I'm hoping to get the MadJS github.io from Eric. But right now, if you're interested, you can go there. You can look at, it's got a history of the YouTube link, the YouTube events recording there, and our sponsors, and also it's a feed of upcoming events too, and also our code of conduct. And as I mentioned, we do have over 2 years of YouTube recordings of this meetup. Connie has been wonderful in collating the information from 2 cameras, putting them together and putting them up on YouTube. It's a lot of work, and we appreciate it, so thank you. And then also, of course, probably the most important thing, we have pizza. We appreciate we appreciate our sponsor this month is Smart Solutions, Dave. And if you want, you can go ahead and introduce yourself. And
sure. I'm not really one for too much for public speaking, but my name is Dave. I work for Smart Solutions, and we're a locally based IT consulting company. We've been here for about 20 years, actually, started in 1996. And we are looking for developers of all skill levels and all backgrounds. I mean, we're really looking for all IT professionals, but we have development openings all over the place, from startup companies to Fortune 500 level companies, senior level, mobile, .NET, Java. Some companies that even still have some COBOL openings out there. But yeah, we love referrals. We pay $1,000 if you do know anyone looking for a position. We have about 140 people who currently work for us, but mostly what we focus on is long-term IT consulting engagements. So a large number of our current employees, they've been with us for several years, some well over 10 and upwards of 15. So there's stability behind a lot of that, and we offer full benefits as well. So we're happy to be back here sponsoring MadJS. It's been a long time, well over, I think, a year, so we were due. Hopefully there's enough pizza, and if there isn't, just blame jazz. But thanks for having us.
Great. And actually, I will also personally endorse Smart Solutions. I've used them as a recruiting source at my prior company, and they were great to work with. And I think fair for the contractors who work with you too. So I think the cuts were quite good. So. Other than that, then, are there any other announcements? Job openings, people looking for jobs, talk to Dave. Cool JavaScript things, web app things. Go ahead. Anything?
TypeScript 2.0 beta has just been released.
Ah, cool.
What are some of the big features of that?
What are the big features?
Yeah.
Oh, I know they dropped the async stuff. That was going to be a big one. I think it was like non-nullable types was sort of the big thing this release. That's all I can think of on the spot here.
Oh, cool.
Anything else? You want to mention Node School topic?
Yeah, so I guess next month we're going to have another Node School. And I think one of the things we decided to do this time is we're going to revisit some of the previous Node School workshoppers that we've been through. And then we're also going to try to improve the workshoppers that we have visited in the past. So you've all noticed that there's been some problems with some of the quality of the workshoppers that we've worked on. And instead of just talking to the group about how to work around those things, we're going to start getting pull requests. So hopefully, as a collective organization here in Madison, we can help improve the quality of the workshoppers for everyone across the world and try to improve the skills of our developers at the same time. So, maybe you can come.
And for those who don't know what Node School is, it's a free, 100% free workshop that we're hosting every other month in either this room or the room next door. You can learn skills related to JavaScript. Even if you're a more seasoned JavaScript developer, I guarantee you'll learn something from going through the workshops, the exercises. I find them really useful. I think everybody who's done them probably would say the same. Also, it's accessible for entry level if you're just starting to learn JavaScript. So, highly recommend it personally. And it's free. What better way to learn some new technologies? So, any other announcements? Everybody's looking for people, so there's got to be some. Alright, fine. That's just a blanket statement. We're all looking for people. Alright, I'm going to hand it off to Chris.
Alright, thanks, Jazz.
Sure.
And do you mind if I try to?
Yeah, go for it.
Just gotta make sure that we get your face.
Oh, I don't know if you want that.
I
But
want that.
if you say so. Oh boy. What's that?
You should be able to get full 1080p.
Yeah, I just wanted to get
Uh,
I just can't find anything over here.
oh, your dual screen.
Yeah.
You can rotate this too if you want. That'll be easier.
Let's see. Maybe if I go into presentation mode here, we'll be.
There you go.
Okay. And I would just like to see. Sorry, I've been practicing with my phone to do the transitions, and I can't seem to get it to connect on the Wi-Fi here. So I just want to pull up my notes here. All right, I think we're good. All right. So yeah, I'm Chris Schmitz. I came down from Green Bay or De Pere today. I work for a company called Headway, which we do a lot of consulting with Ruby on Rails and React.js. And we've seen a lot of people adopting WebPack as a front-end build tool. Even in the Rails world, I'm working on it with a couple clients right now who are replacing the asset pipeline, like we had talked about a little bit, using WebPack. So just wanted to share a couple of things that I picked up over the last couple of months exploring WebPack. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. We don't have this kind of community where I live, so it's awesome to be a part of yours down here and see, just the amount of people you have and the excitement around JavaScript and new technologies. So thank you for letting me be a part of this. I'm also curious, how many people are using WebPack right now? A little bit. I see one of these. Okay. Okay. Awesome. And so a lot of people are. How many more people are exploring it to replace their current build systems? Okay. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, guys. So at its core, WebPack is just a module bundler, similar to something like Browsersync. If you've been writing a lot of JavaScript lately, you've probably seen like this new module syntax especially if you're writing JavaScript on the server. Can't really get around it. I haven't written a lot of Node, but I know like it's the module system is native to a lot of the server-side JavaScript. And now the browser is starting to adopt some of these best practices that a lot of the server-side JavaScript kind of pioneered, and WebPack ties into that to just pull in and bundle different modules. So if you're coming from something like Browserify, you can think of this as just kind of a replacement for that with some additional features. Another common point of confusion with WebPack is where it fits in with tools like Gulp and Grunt and some of the task runners that are out there. And the difference is really, task runners don't make any assumptions about the code that you want to run. They're not tailored for any certain type of use. And WebPack does make some of those assumptions, which allows you to be, in my opinion, a lot more productive with just writing less code and a lot less of that boilerplate that you would need to do some of the things with Task Runner. You could achieve the same setup that you could with Gulp or WebPack, but I think WebPack's just kind of tailored to people who are trying to take a bunch of different assets and compile them down, JavaScript, CSS, images, and compile them down to something to just what you need to serve up for your applications. So before we get too deep into the specifics of WebPack, I think it's worth going through a little bit of the evolution of JavaScript modules and why a tool like WebPack even needs to exist, especially if you haven't done any server-side JavaScript. You probably come up with your own ways or tried a few different ways of kind of modularizing your code. But I think it's worth exploring how we got to where we are today, because modules in the browser are a relatively new thing, and I think it's worth knowing, how we got here and where WebPack fits in with this. So the very first iteration of a JavaScript organization looks a little something like this. You've probably seen applications like this. It's just a bunch of script tags, which did provide some isolation, organization of your code. But there's a lot of drawbacks to this. It clutters up the global scope. Everything's on the global scope. It's very dependent on a specific load order. You have to make sure your dependencies are loaded before you reference them in the files loaded later. This is just very brittle. But it did help a little bit with code organization, but it just is not a scalable way to build JavaScript applications. So the next iteration that I saw was, people saying, JavaScript actually has a structure for organization already. It's called an object. Like, why don't we just do that? So let's define one kind of namespace for our application, and let's assign all of our everything off of that. So this does provide some encapsulation, but you're still very dependent on specific load order of your files. And you're still cluttering up the global scope. At the end of the day, something else could come in and assign my app to something else and just completely blow away anything that you had attached to the window there. And the other thing here is just any of this code that you develop this way just isn't very reusable or shareable. So the next evolution was something called the revealing module pattern, or the immediately invoked function expression is really the main difference here. So we really just wrap the module in a function, which gives us an isolated scope to define our logic in, which is nice because we can do things like it acts kind of like a constructor. You can execute any logic you want within the function. You can define methods, and they're essentially private methods, and you can return whatever public API you want to provide access to. And this model actually isn't that bad, and it's the inspiration for a lot of the module systems that we have now. But at the end of the day, this wasn't a specification. This is just, we figured out, JavaScript gave us some things that we could use to get what we wanted. Get that isolation, protect the global scope, and but it's still just kind of ad hoc, and there's no specification or anything behind it. So when server-side JavaScript came on, was growing in popularity, they saw the problems that the front-end community was facing around modules, and they were really motivated to create standards for module systems out of the gate, rather than leaving it up to developers to decide how they wanted to handle it, and just alleviate some of that pain and some of the, make it so that you didn't even have to make the decision coming in. You could just depend on the module system that they gave you. So I'm not going to go into detail on each of these module systems. They've been debated, the merits of each, very heavily over the last couple of years. And these are all very relevant today. You'll still see a lot of code that is defined in these different formats. But personally, I'm glad to see that ES 2015, they have defined a module API that we can use that is going to be supported in future versions of JavaScript. And really the important thing that all of these give us is we have that isolation. We're not cluttering up global scope. Modules are very reusable. You can import them into any project you need them. So code reuse is, you get the code reuse that we've been wanting. We also have dependency management. We can just require the things that we need. Or anything that you require can have its own dependencies, and you can build up this dependency hierarchy with all of these import statements, which we'll see the syntax for in a little bit. But if you depend on another module which has 6 dependencies, WebPack is able to see all of these different dependencies of the dependencies, and it's called a dependency hierarchy. And knowing all of that, it can do a lot of things around optimization of your code, or to optimize your code, just because we have that tree to work with. And this also gives us tools like static analysis. You can require something in, and you can analyze that and get some immediate feedback in your IDEs and tooling that you use. So going back to what WebPack is, it's just a tool that's able to take modules with dependencies. It can run transformations on the things that it requires in, and then it compiles them down to static assets, which represent the modules. So this is the diagram that you will see in kind of any introductory article. Also on the WebPack site, this is just lifted straight from the documentation. But you can see CoffeeScript, LESS files, CSS, Jade, JavaScript, PNGs, and it can take all that and know what's depending on what and compile it down just to what you need to deliver for your application. So here's an example of I don't know why I made these separate transitions here, but here's an example WebPack, or of just how WebPack works with a couple modules. So let's say we have this headway.js. So Headway is the company I work for. Those are the people at our company. And we export, module.exports says this is available to anyone who requires in my module. It's what's public from my module. So in my app.js, I assign that to a variable, and I require that in, and then I just log out the names. And the simplest WebPack configuration you'll ever see is right here. So WebPack, the command line utility, you can just run it, and you can tell it the first thing is what's the input, and then what's the output. So it's going to look at app.js. It's going to realize, oh, it's requiring headway.js, so that's going to be the dependency tree. It's going to see that, and it's going to pull it in and compile everything down into one JavaScript file called bundle.js. Now, running things from the command line is nice, but WebPack also has the ability to define all of these things in a configuration file. So when you actually want to run it in any of your applications, you'll end up having a configuration file that looks very much, or has a lot of these same properties. So this will, having things defined in the configuration file will give us the ability to just run Webpack, and it will find our webpack.config.js and run things accordingly to our configuration. So there's 4 pieces that I want to highlight in this, and these are really the only things that I think you need to understand to get started and be productive with Webpack. So even though you can look at the documentation of Webpack, and there's a lot of things it can do, there's a lot of APIs, especially around plugins, but I think people, it can be a little overwhelming at first, but so just knowing that you only really need to care about these 4 things, the entry, the output, the loaders, and the plugins, and just having a little bit of a grasp of how those work will enable you to be a lot more productive with it right out of the gate. So the entry is just saying that's replacing that first argument of the Webpack command we ran earlier. So that's just saying this is the entry point to our application. This is going to require some other things which are going to have their own dependencies. But there's just one file that is the entry point to our app. The output is just some configuration saying path is I want to put it in this folder, file name. This is what I want to call it. Module isn't really that important. We'll talk about some of the different options you can put in there, but the loaders are the most important thing that you'll define within this section. And loaders are what perform transformations on your files as they are required into the build process. The other piece here is plugins, and plugins make use of different lifecycle hooks during the build process to analyze and manipulate your builds. So in this example, we take the finished output and we run it through Uglify to just minimize our scripts. So let's go in depth into loaders. So loaders are just modules, and in their simplest case, they're really just a single function that are exported as a module. They receive the file contents as a string, and they're able to modify the string and return the transform string to be processed by the next loader or by the next phase of the build process. So you can have multiple loaders, you can pipe them into other loaders, but really all that's coming in is it's saying, hey, I found this file, here's its contents, and they're kind of dumb. They just know they have a string, and they just run this manipulation on it, then they send it along to the next, and Webpack handles routing that to the next part of the build process. So going back to our example, Webpack config, you can see here we're processing, we have 2 loaders. One is for our JavaScript / JSX files, and one's for our SCSS. And there's a couple different syntaxes for defining which loaders you want to use. I like this one, defining it as an array, but you will see some different options. A lot of times it'll just be a string, and they'll use an exclamation point to say what's getting typed into the next one. But I like using arrays in these kind of basic setups here. So looking at the loader, there's just 2 parts. The test is just an actual test that is run as a JavaScript or as a file is required by Webpack. It's going to say, hey, does this regular expression match the file type that I'm loading right now? So it's given the name of the file, and then does it pass or not? If it passes, so in this case, if it's a JS or JSX file, run it through my Babel transformer. And then the other case, if it's an SCSS file, run it through my Sass, CSS, and style loaders. And it's, I guess one thing that has caused me a little bit of confusion is it does go from right to left. So the first transformation is on the far right, and then it works its way left. So I'm going to give it an SCSS file. Sass is going to compile down to CSS. The CSS loader, I haven't had to deal with it much. I just know that the style and CSS loaders you need to use to deliver style sheets to your applications. But from what I understand, the CSS loader takes a string of CSS, turns it into kind of a configuration object for a style sheet that JavaScript can parse, and then style loader is actually used for injecting the style sheets where they're required. So I mentioned there were a few different types of loaders, and you'll primarily be working with the loaders that we saw, just the default loaders inside of that module option for your configuration. But it's important to note there are things for preloaders. There's the regular loaders. There's loaders that can be defined inline, so as you require a file, you can say run it through this loader. And then there's post loaders. So I haven't actually used option 3 or 4 here before, but you do see preloaders used on a somewhat regular basis for things like linting and things like that. Yeah, sorry, that's everything for. So, any questions on loaders and how that works before we jump into the next big concept? Did that all make sense? This is the first time I've presented any of this stuff, so I just want to make sure. Okay. So plugins expose the full potential of Webpack to third-party developers. They provide a number of callbacks that developers can tie into, and these callbacks provide access to the compiler and the actual compilation, each individual compilation. So the compiler is just kind of the information about your system, and each compilation is like, here's the build that I currently have in progress that you can tie right into and access and manipulate. So for example, there's an optimization step, like I'll jump to the example, that you can tie into specifically for performing optimizations on the code within the compilation phase. So this is a very rudimentary example of Webpack plugin, and I've never actually written a Webpack plugin, but I think it's very helpful to understand just how they work and what they're doing. So after our transformations are run, and Webpack kind of executes in the order of the configuration. So you can see the entry point, and this is where I need to put it, which I guess that would be at the bottom if it was really in order. But then the loaders run transformations on the files, and the next step in the build phase is these plugins. And a plugin is just a function. It has to have this apply method defined on its prototype, and that gives it access to the compiler. And with the compiler, you can access different stages within the compilation. So during the compilation phase, I want to tie into the optimize hook, and I can do something, like Uglified.js kind of does. So the place where I've seen people leverage this for writing their own custom plugins is usually around reporting or analyzing their builds. You have access to everything that is in your build at this point. So you can, log out output. You could create things that you can use to spit out a report at the end of the build. But yeah, for the most part, you're probably going to rely on third-party plugins for a lot of this. But this is the two big examples that I see for a lot of this are minifying code and then finding duplicated code and removing that from the builds before they get out to the production assets. So another really big feature of Webpack, and where it's kind of different from some of the other tools that are that you can achieve kind of the same thing with, is code splitting. So for big web applications, it's not always efficient to put all the code in a single file. I think we've all had these huge JavaScript files with like 30, vendor third-party libraries pulled in along with all your application code, and your JavaScript payload ends up being like a megabyte of code to deliver on every page request. So Webpack kind of gives us a way to get around that. It has this feature, it refers to them as chunks, which can be loaded, or it can be split up and loaded as you need them within your application in script files, or you can even have a syntax for loading them on demand. So we'll explore that a little bit here. So really, to make use of code chunks, all you need to do is define multiple entry points for your application. So rather than just having app.js, you might have, and I see this a lot personally in React applications, you might have some components that you only load for the initial payload one page. So the router you tie into events within the router, and you're able to say, when I get this event, give me require this feature or require this component. Sorry, this is the example we actually want to see for this. But that's where this require.ensure, the syntax is kind of, I don't know where it comes from. A lot of people complain about the WebPack API. It's not very easy to remember or very easy to see, or self-explanatory. But by having multiple entry points and then requiring them through this syntax here, we're actually able to say, don't give me this until I need it. So just by saying we have multiple entry points, we'll get two different chunks, feature A and feature B, which could be loaded as separate script tags if you're not doing a single page app, or if you are, you can. This example isn't that great because it doesn't have a lot of context, but what typically ends up happening is you end up listening for an event, and a lot of times that event is a location change, and I'm on this new page, and I need this new component for this page. So you can use this require.ensure syntax to pull that feature in on demand, and it'll actually load, handle the request and everything, load the file, and then run the code. And anything that's run inside of that ensure block can be run synchronously as if that module exists. Does that make sense? I kind of stumbled through that, but it's a really great feature that a lot of people are leveraging, something that used to be relatively difficult to pull off, and WebPack makes it not trivial, but pretty easy to implement. Okay. Another big thing that a lot of people use WebPack for is just optimization of their code. We touched on it a little bit in plugins, but I see this in almost every build, so I want to just touch on a couple really common things here. So one is minification, the other is deduplication. So minification, I think most people will probably end up using Uglify.js. You can pass in the configuration that you need to the plugin here, just when you initialize the new instance of it. And going back to what we were talking about earlier with how the plugins work, remember all this is doing is taking, so it went through our loaders, we have these transformed files, we wrote in ES6, it was compiled down with Babel, and to work in all the browsers that we want to target, and then we were able to run, take that compiled output and just run it through Uglify and say make this smaller, minimize this for me. The other one I see used quite a bit, and this is another thing that is only we're only able to use because we know about that dependency tree, we know where different code is used, but deduplication becomes pretty trivial. There's a plugin for it, and all you need to do is initialize it. I just realized the one thing I didn't mention or show in these examples is you do need to require the plugins before you use them, because they're just JavaScript modules. But since it knows the dependency tree and knows what's using different parts of the code base, this becomes very simple to do. And one other thing here that I don't have an example for is that I see a lot is there's a plugin called the Commons Chunk plugin, and it's able to take things like vendored libraries. You see it a lot with, but it'll analyze all of your libraries and take out anything that's used more than once, and you can give it a threshold. You can say I want it to be used more than twice or 5 times. But you can take anything that's used in multiple places within your app and bundle that into its own script file that you can deliver separately from the rest of your application. And that's useful in a lot of cases where you want to load that first and make sure that it's something that you probably do a lot of. You load your vendor libraries first if you were doing kind of the 30 script tags example from earlier, but it's something that it can just handle for us. Another great feature are some of the dev tools that are available. I just want to cover two here quick. So there's a dev tool configuration option that can be set right on the Webpack config that enables some helpful things for debugging. So the big thing is just source maps. Oh, you guys can see it. The big thing here is source maps, and there's a number of different options they have for producing source maps that have different trade-offs. I think there's like 8 or 10 different configuration options for this. But you can, I won't go through those, but just take a look at the documentation. You can see what might be right for yours. But it kind of depends on how big your builds are, and there's trade-offs between kind of performance in producing them and just how useful they are for the debugging output they give you. And the other tool that I think everyone uses is the Webpack Dev Server. So this gives you some things like auto refresh, proxies, hot module replacement, just right out of the box. So rather than starting up just a little node server, you can just use the Webpack Dev Server, and that'll tie, you can have it just watch all your files and get a lot of those niceties for local development right out of the box. Some other cool stuff that you can do with Webpack. One of the big things that I use a lot is image optimization. So you can configure things like if this image is below this threshold, say 100 kilobytes or something, just render it in line as a data URI instead of making it a separate HTTP request. And that's something that, again, is just a plugin, and just a couple seconds of configuration, and you have a great new optimization for your site. Kind of the same thing for fonts. I haven't used it for font optimization, but I know a lot of people have found similar things to do there. Code deduplication, I guess I actually covered some of that, and extracting common code with the comments chunk plugin. So just to recap, that's really all I had prepared for today. I think there's a lot more to Webpack, but I don't think it's worth diving into in the first exploration. I think understanding those 4 kind of key principles of it enable you to get 90, 95, in a lot of cases 100% of what you want to do with the tool. I would definitely take some time to go through the docs, get a better description of probably what I just gave you, and if you're using something like Browserify, if you're using Gulp, I would just encourage you to try it. Even it doesn't need to be a complete replacement for your entire build process either. You could use it just for bundling. You could use just it can be somewhat modular in how you use it, but it is extremely fast, and I've really enjoyed using it over any of the other build tools that I've used. So, and that is all I have for tonight. Thank you again for having me. Are there any questions?
So in your discussion, you talked about things like font optimization and CSS and images.
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that I dug into this one time and lost what little hair I have left to find out that this is an example of CSS. Would you describe it as being that each one of those assets is now going to be set up to be talked to JavaScript? So for example, if I want to use those images that come out, you mentioned the data URI and the image, it would be the JavaScript that would be using it. Is that correct?
Yes. And it is kind of, the lines are blurred, which is kind of confusing, especially with things like style sheets. But yeah, they are compiled down like with style sheets, you end up requiring, or you can at least require style sheets. You can reference styles in line. So rather with your style attribute, you can import a style sheet and actually access the selectors as like JavaScript objects, and that'll inline things for you. So there's a lot of JavaScript has control over all of that, I guess you could say. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Yeah. Just another one here.
So we're talking about async loading. So let's say feature A and feature B both have the same dependency.
Yeah.
Are you duplicating that dependency when you load those chunks in? And would you use the deduplication plugin to handle that, or is it kind of handle that automatically?
Yeah, so I think there's two different ways you could do it. So the commons chunk plugin, it could be analyzed and included as a common chunk before it even gets to that. Or else, yeah, it would see it as a dependency on load time and pull that in. But it would create a chunk out of that file and its dependencies. So it wouldn't be at load time like parsing the whole, like that feature's dependency tree and requiring all that. It would have already created that chunk that can be included just for that file. Does that answer? Okay. Yeah.
Can you talk about competing tools to Webpack? And I know that Browsersync is probably one of them. What are others and pros and cons?
Yeah, so I think Browsersync is the only other bundler that I see used a lot at this point. But there are a lot of tools like Broccoli, Brunch, which have this kind of more, they do a lot more for you, I guess. They kind of have this plugin ecosystem, things like that. And I think, I've heard great things about Broccoli, I've heard great things about Brunch, but they all kind of tout the same things from what I've seen. I haven't, I'm not sure why, honestly, but Webpack just has, seems to be a lot more widely adopted, and there's a lot more resources to get started, and it seems to be a lot more actively developed. It seems like it's kind of solo developers behind the, Broccoli and Brunch are the two that I've seen a lot of, and I mean, Webpack just seems to be moving at a lot faster pace in terms of new features. Then there is Webpack 2 coming out, it looks like relatively soon, and there are some new features in that I haven't explored a lot, but I know there's some exciting stuff. But the other big thing I see is a lot of people are still using Gulp, and they're like, I can do all this with my Gulp tasks. I can, I have all this stuff working. Why would I swap it out for Webpack? That's a valid argument. I think the biggest argument is just it takes less time to develop that configuration. If you already have it in place and it's working for you, I don't see any reason to replace it. But you don't have things like the knowledge of your dependency hierarchy and the other tasks that are running throughout the process, the other things that have manipulated the code before you. So there's just a lot of, I think it's somewhat, there's more you're able to do in the Webpack build process as a part of that. Just having access to the compiler and each compilation and all the metadata around that. Yeah.
What are your favorite online resources to go to learn more about Webpack or reference?
Yeah, their documentation is pretty good. There's kind of a quick start that's nice. Egghead has a couple of resources for kind of getting started. Egghead is just like a video tutorials. Unfortunately, I mean, it's kind of good and bad. If you just kind of Google Webpack with whatever your framework of choice is, you'll find a lot of options, but it's hard to know what's really great and what's not. One thing that I looked at a lot was there's a guy named Pete Hunt who worked for Facebook and he has a talk on WebPack and how they use it at Instagram, and then he also has a repo of kind of some best practices for how to use WebPack and how they're using it at Facebook. It's pretty interesting. But yeah, a lot of it does come down to, whether you're using it for React or, it's kind of framework specific. But once you get past the docs, I would probably dive through it. I just go through more than one of like the tutorials for Webpack with whatever framework you're kind of looking at. And if you look for specific things, there's a lot of good resources too. So like image optimization, deduplication, like if you add some of those keywords, you'll find things. There's also really good references of all the different loaders and plugins available. They have them on, I don't know if it's an exhaustive list, but they have lists on the WebPack documentation, a lot of stuff that's available. And I got a lot of inspiration just from reading through some of the plugins that were there and saying, oh, I could use that. That sounds pretty cool.
You mentioned WebPack 2. Is it a breaking set of changes, or will it be compatible with your?
Oh yeah, good question. Do we have another Angular migration? Yeah. I'm not certain on that, but from what I can see, the features don't look like anything really groundbreaking or that's really going to. I don't know why they would give up or like break everything for everyone else to get these kind of small, niceties. They're not. Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that, so I would assume it's not the case because I would think people would be revolting, like they did when Angular announced their upgrade path.
Can you talk about your experience? What led you to get into WebPack? Trying to learn from your mistakes.
Oh yeah. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Well, I was exploring it a lot when I was doing a lot of prototyping, a lot of front-end prototyping. And so we wanted just kind of lightweight server and some of the nice things for front-end development. So I looked at a lot of different tools. I had used Gulp in the past. I had used Brunch in the past. I had used Broccoli in the past. I think just to round out everything, I said, let's try Webpack, But I ended up using it and just thinking like, oh, everything just actually worked the way I kind of expected it to out of the box, which wasn't the case with definitely not Broccoli. Just a lot of things just didn't work, and the ecosystem was really young. But so that's actually around the time that I saw the call for speakers, and I submitted to give this talk. But in that time, I have not used Webpack for a long time, but and I do consulting, so it kind of depends what project I'm on. But the project I'm on now, we actually just introduced Webpack for React and Redux front end on a Rails application. So we're kind of replacing that, or not replacing. There's still a lot of stuff being compiled by the asset pipeline, but we're delivering this on top of that. Yeah, sorry, did that, or you want me to go deeper into any of that?
Yeah.
Or
I just wanted to know what's your journey? How did you get to Webpack? You're like, oh, Broccoli doesn't work, so I'm gonna try something different until I.
Yeah, well, it worked and it was great. That the big thing for me that I ran into with Gulp, it was just speed. Like I was running into bottlenecks with some of the applications that I was working on. I was maintaining this big UI kit at the time. And so it was just all of the front-end assets for all of the UI for all of our applications at this company I was at. And the builds weren't long, but maybe a second. And I noticed the promises of some of these other tools, like Broccoli, was it could do a lot of things asynchronously that I wasn't quite able to do at the time, at least with Gulp. So I started exploring some other build tools. And then I liked the idea of something kind of tailor-made for compiling things down to static assets, which Gulp isn't necessarily that. It's just any arbitrary commands I want to run, and I can declare dependencies and get the order just right, and things will work. But it all felt a little brittle to me. So I like the idea of having a tool that was a little bit more tailored to my use, and then that got me just exploring other things, and ultimately landing on WebPack.
And you use the WebPack Dev Server to do device testing for other devices that are on your Wi-Fi network?
I have not, but I have used like Browsersync a lot in the past. Is that what you're using now?
Yeah, I've heard that you can use the WebPack server to get it to work, but I haven't gotten
Okay.
it yet.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things you can do, but yeah, I haven't had much of a need to do it, at least on the project that I've been on with it, so yeah. Let's see.
All right. And like Chris mentioned, we do encourage people to talk. So if you have something you want to talk about at this meeting, just let us know, and we'll get it scheduled.
Anyone can do it, obviously.
But yeah, just let us know. Next month we're going to do Node School. Josh posts that. Again, it's very valuable. You have mentors who have gone through the classes or the workshops. So if you have questions, if you had stumbling blocks, you can ask questions there.
It's just, do we have a month off? I thought there was one
We
month.
do have a month off, but it's not next month. I don't have to check on it. I'm pretty sure I put a note in saying that we don't have the room at least. So I think it's in October or November.
Okay.
I have to check. But yeah, so Node School, obviously we mentored. What I'd recommend is if you did hit some stumbling blocks, just bring them in, make note of it, and bring them in as like things to ask during the session. That would probably help us like figure things out. Or we may even put an email out saying, put your comments here or something like that.
Yeah, do you remember the date?
I think it's, so it'll be August 8th.
Is it a Monday?
Yeah, it's always the second Monday of the month. So August 1 and then August 8th.
It's not a Wednesday.
No, it's a Monday. It's always a Monday. So, great. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. I hope that was useful.